Yeah, welcome everybody to today's webinar. We're happy to be joined with Trace3 today, talking about success in hybrid cloud. Trace is one of our best partners. We've been working with Trace3 for, oh gosh, probably 4 years. Actually predates me at Morpheus. I'm now coming on over year 4, and I have known my co-host Jared for a good chunk of that time. So I'm Brad Parks. I run marketing enablement, go to market. My daughter thinks I make stickers and t-shirts for a living, but I do what it takes to evangelize Morpheus. I'm joined by Jared. You want to give a self-introduction?
Sure. Jared Luchin, Director of the Solutions Environments for Trace3, focusing on building out demo environments, labs for our internal customers as well as our partners and our external customers to provide unique solutions that they can go and test and validate different technologies.
I'm excited to be joined by Jared today because he definitely has spent time down in the bowels of Morpheus. He's got a hotline to our CTO. They're on Slack together, so Jared has a lot of good war stories and practitioner experience to bring to bear on this problem domain. So definitely should be an interesting conversation. A little bit of an agenda. We're gonna turn it over to Jared at the start, tell you a little bit about Trace and their approach to hybrid cloud. I've got some interesting recent stats I'm gonna share, talk a little bit about Morpheus, share some of those war stories, and then hopefully give you some tactical takeaways. But hopefully we keep this to around 30 minutes. Make sure you get plenty of time to go do the rest of your day. We appreciate you taking a little bit of time out though. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jared.
Awesome, thank you. So Trace3 has always taken an approach, as we start talking about hybrid cloud and we start looking at, there's a lot of people that want the Amazon look and feel, the self-service portal, the consistency that provides. And really it starts with integrating the underlying technology, the infrastructure that you're putting in place, understanding the different challenges that you have associated with those, and then building a good foundation to where you can then go into, the automation phase because you have the consistency, built out on the integrate side of things. You get into the automate side, and as you look at, not only DevOps coming into play, but even public and private cloud, there's a lot of nuances and challenges associated with that. So Trace3 goes through and it kind of helps evaluate with customers and understand, what the goals are, how can we get you faster to market with your products and solutions, what are tools that can help simplify your lives and make you focus on things that are forward thinking and looking at, the future rather than putting out fires, and really providing that, cohesive message across your organization. We also have a big practice around innovation. It's been something that's been in the Trace3 DNA for as long as I've been working with them for, better part of 10 years now, where Trace3 has always been looking at what's coming next and try to stay ahead of those curves and try to stay ahead of those, let's try to foreshadow kind of what's happening in the market, where it's going, how do we get in front of that? How do we get in front of it to where we can help you guys innovate and implement? A couple of new ones that we're working on right now is data intelligence. We have a big practice which works specifically with data intelligence and machine learning to where they're building out, offerings and solutions around that. The Internet of Things, I do know the person heading up the Internet of Things where they're looking at, how can you build, sensors, and how can you put sensors into your work environment? Maybe it's at the edge devices. Maybe it's we have one customer that's looking at a button or a little mechanic button that will actually go out and push a power button on a server or switch to reset it because they don't have anyone remote. So things like that are new and different and interesting, and the Internet of Things is kind of where the industry is heading towards, or at least having a big push towards from new innovations. And then as we get up to the Elevate side, this really kind of ties into kind of the overall story of where Trace3 kind of drives that new innovation and where we try to bring up our customers to the next level. The research team we have associated with Trace3, these research analysts go out and look for the new markets, the new technologies that are out there, new startups. Morpheus is one of those. That's a key factor in that. As we start to find those technologies, then we go out and we've worked with VCs and the different venture capitalist firms out there and said, hey, look, we need to build a way that we can, provide a curated schedule for our customers and say, hey, in your particular industry, whether it be healthcare, whether it be, ISPs or service providers, what are things that the venture capitalists are looking at, because they're thinking, 10 years ahead of us and trying to figure out what the next thing to invest in is. What are they looking at and how are they approaching it? So the VC briefings give our customers the chance or the opportunity to talk to new technology companies that are in their field or trying to solve problems within their field. And it could be before before they go public. It could be stealth startups. It could be just as they're starting to get into the market, start selling and start getting customer traction and whatnot. So really a good way for you to look at the next gen stuff before it's fully implemented or before it's fully thought out. Morpheus has kind of been a huge part of that for us. We actually have implemented in our Center of Excellence labs. We've leveraged it a lot from a customer standpoint. It's really been kind of the glue that holds this hybrid cloud message together and really helps us kind of simplify the solutions and really provide a faster to market story for our customers. So excited to have them. I'll turn that back over to you, Brad.
Yeah, I think it's it's been awesome working with Trace3 over the years. I've worked with hundreds of channel partners over the last decade or so in in IT in different roles, and I think you are unique in that kind of forward leaning. There are a lot of partners who wait for a market to mature before they jump in, but it's been nice working with Trace. That's probably why you were one of our earliest partners, as you were looking at where the market was going, and now fast forward 5 years, I think we've seen triple-digit growth. We're bringing hundreds of customers on each year, so it's been nice to see that journey and have Trace arm in arm with us along for the ride. So kind of moving forward, I thought before we get into platform itself and talk to Jared about some of the war stories, it's always worth taking a step back and seeing what the peer groups are saying. It was interesting. I actually did a webinar earlier this morning with the co-founder and one of the managing directors over at 451 Research, and these are a couple of the data points that he shared. This one was interesting because we're now 10, 15 years into cloud, into DevOps, and probably the most interesting thing is that this slide is no longer that interesting, right? What people are looking to get out of cloud hasn't changed materially in the last handful of years, right? It boils down to the good old better, faster, cheaper, right? Cloud computing being defined as on-demand access to elastic services. Probably no surprise that faster response to needs tops the chart, and I would guess has topped the chart every time they've done this research for the last decade. I think more interestingly is probably where kind of current state of affairs is when we look at the mix of what does a cloud mean to an enterprise today. If I go back 10 years when cloud management was really starting to be a thing, I think there was a fear, right, from a lot of on-prem CIOs that public cloud was just going to gobble up everything. I think where we've normalized as an industry is really a stasis point to where hybrid is the reality. There's just too much data gravity, traditional applications that were built and curated on-prem for everything to move to the public cloud. And I'm also seeing kind of almost a full circle. I think private cloud 5-6 years ago was almost a war room of horror stories, right? People had tried to do private cloud deployments and ultimately became dissatisfied because it was a messy mess of scripts and handcrafted private clouds and portals, and it kind of got a bad taste. If I fast forward, right now we're seeing application teams that have spent time up in the public cloud. They're bringing a very new set of requirements to their on-prem ops team. Like what they expect out of an on-prem vCenter or Acropolis environment is very different today than probably what they asked for 5-6 years ago. Honestly, 5 or 6 years ago, they probably just gave up on IT and went straight to the public cloud. But today, Dev and Ops have moved a bit closer together, but they're looking for programmatic addressability, really PaaS-like services out of their on-prem. I'll maybe toss this one over to you, Jared. What's kind of the mix that you're seeing from customers that you're talking to?
It's very interesting. When cloud first came out, you saw a big rush. Like, that's the new thing. We have to get there. We're going to move all of our applications there. And you saw a huge influx of people going investing in cloud. And then you saw kind of a step back because, getting the right mix or building your applications, putting a monolithic app out there may not be the best solution or the most cost-effective solution. So we started seeing kind of that pullback a little bit, to kind of reassess and kind of refactor some of their applications and figure out the best way to do it. And to your point, I really think that, the cloud guys that started out with the cloud and have been in the cloud and have written applications for the cloud, they really kind of helped push this idea of self-service as a whole, where now people are demanding, because before, back, when I was doing operations, it was the NetApp team, you had the storage team, the VMware team, you had the network team. They all work independently and individually of each other, all trying to achieve the same goal, do more with less and get it faster and cheaper than you ever did it before. Whereas now it's all these teams are starting to kind of merge together and start to focus on how do we allow the end user to start provisioning their resources so we can focus on bigger and better things, or can we get the next product in place. But I think from overall standpoint, the hybrid cloud message is kind of where I think the market is starting to, I won't say stabilize. I mean, there's definitely shifts left or right, but it's definitely the norm that I'm seeing more of, and I see more customers asking for that versus one versus the other, depending on the applications that they build.
Yeah, one of the slides I didn't grab, it had some good data points around within multi-cloud, right? For those who are in hybrid, but also have multiple public clouds, the average number of clouds that the research showed was about 2.5. So a combination of some on-prem platform, as well as at least one, more often than not two, of the public clouds being part of the mix. A couple of points, Jared, actually you hit on the teams within the enterprise. If you're going to be managing multiple platforms and multiple clouds and you're trying to modernize your apps, I think one of the big shining gaps that we see out there in market is there are not enough Jareds to go around, right? People who can navigate, vCenter, right? AWS, Ansible, Terraform, Kubernetes. I mean, the list of skills that people are being asked to manage today as an operations function is mind-boggling. I mean, I was an IT guy 15 plus years ago, and I don't think I could ever go back, because what is being asked of ops teams today is just a night and day difference from how easy we had it when when life was simple in the before times. Maybe ask you, since you work on the managed services side, you work with your SEs inside Trace. What are some of the skill gaps that you're seeing? What seems to be the hottest skill set to have?
Right now, I think it's really kind of in the DevOps space and the automation space. Finding people that have written Ansible, or finding people that are writing Python or whatnot that can, bridge that gap between cloud and on-prem. It's interesting to me. I mean, coming into this from the infrastructure side, trying to learn cloud to try to get, up to speed on all the different components, because they release 10,000 features a week or whatever it is, because they can iterate so fast. It's hard to keep up with. And the cloud expertise, I mean, that's something that I think is going to be huge, moving forward. And I think there's more and more need for that. So I think more and more there's going to be a blend where the infrastructure guys are going to be picking up some of those other skill sets. I definitely think the cloud expertise and the DevOps side of things are two big ones for me that are big gaps that I see so far.
Yes, anyone who's sending a kid to college, tell them to pick up an Ansible course along the way. They probably will be well employed. So this kind of last on the data side, I thought it was interesting, kind of coming full circle. If hybrid cloud's a thing, we know there are skill gaps. This kind of leads to actually more the people and process, right? Tools and technology are one thing, but people and process is always the other half of any transformation effort. Just a quick orientation on this slide, the blue and the teal green there, that means as a functional area for expectations, that group is exceeding or meeting expectations. So towards the top, we have items that actually everyone's pretty well satisfied, right? If cloud is about on-demand access, I guess it's no shock that being able to move fast, check that box, right? Everyone feels like they're getting that expectation met out of their current hybrid IT estate. However, the further down this list you go, the more more the gap widens between I guess aspiration and execution, and the big red box at the bottom rings true and really kind of shines a light on why Morpheus exists. The fact is, if you're going to have 2.5+ cloud platforms, yet you have a skills gap, you better have a way to simplify the management of those downstream endpoints and unify how you're dealing with all of the associated tooling. And it still seems to be an area that many customers are struggling with. So it's probably why we're growing in triple digits. But back to that origin story that Jared was hitting on, right? 5-6 years ago, this was still an emerging market around unified cloud automation. Today, it's really becoming a must-have if you are going to try and change this dimension and make sure that you are meeting your expectations around simplicity and bringing those environments under a unified front. So with that, I think pivoting from data to a little view of reality, this is it's one of my favorite slides. I actually stole it from one of our customers. They had their version of this printed out on a large format printout on a war room back when you could fly and meet customers. Hopefully one of these days we'll get back in the air. But they were literally mapping out the OS team, the storage team, the vCenter admin, the backup admin, and the app dev team were locked in a room, almost like voting for the new pope, right? They were going to let smoke out when they had solved the problem, but they were trying to map out the 200+ steps that it took to go from a service request to a production-ready app stack being deployed. In this case, it was a public-facing website for a Global 1000 company. But it's kind of my story. I don't know, is this still something that rings true to you down in it with customers?
Oh man, this is one of my favorite slides, because when you walk into customers, I mean, they've got so many things that are happening, and they've got so many different teams that they have to work with. Even when I was doing operations side of things, I mean, this is, you have 10 different teams that you have to go coordinate with and integrate with, and each one has their own skill set, and each one is very specific in that skill set. And this is, I think this is one of the biggest challenges from the infrastructure side nowadays, because there's so many new technologies out there, and there's so many different ways you can do things now. It really provides a challenge of how do you map all those together? How do you create a cohesive story to where you can bring those teams together, where they can work together and continue to thrive and strive to get the business needs met.
I think I might be dating myself a little bit, but I do feel like when I'm out talking to customers or working with partners like Trace, the customer environment as a whole reminds me of the old Windows status update bar, right? The last 5% is where you get frustratingly stuck. Why is that taking an hour? Everything else moved pretty smooth up to that point. I feel like customers are not lacking for tools, right? There are too many tools oftentimes, but what's escaping them for that last little bit is kind of bringing those together in a meaningful context to actually get to the outcome, right? Standing up an application service, delivering value back to the business, because apps are, at the end of the day, what our whole crazy industry is all about. Everything underneath is somehow supporting that, right? The application is what rules the day. It's what delivers business value. It's what helps companies interact with their users, their stakeholders. With that in mind, that is what Morpheus is all about. We start with the application. Now, self-service, Jared mentioned it earlier. It's really what makes a cloud a cloud. The classic NIST definition is self-service, on-demand application or on-demand access to application resources in a scalable way, right? So self-service is what Morpheus is all about. When we think about self-service, though, it can mean different things. For us, we want that end user, that developer, that data scientist to be able to either push a button, make an API call, but get the application service that they're asking for. It's not about just, hey, can I have a VM? You know, VM vending is, I guess, interesting, but it's probably not as useful as, you know, application vending, right? I need a database. I need my multi-tier app stack deployed. I think that's when you're starting to bring meaning to some of this tooling. One of the other interesting things that I've noticed just in my own journey here with Morpheus over the last 4 years is the type of user that is consuming hybrid cloud has changed a little bit. We still have our, we still have our Jareds, right? Our power users, our senior ops professionals who want to be able to provision and automate their workflows in a simpler way. Choose their storage, choose which ports they want to open. We would call that our power user GUI. We clearly have developers front of mind since they're the ones consuming and ultimately driving applications, or they want to embed Morpheus programmatically as part of their pipelines and spin up environments and tear them down very quickly. But interestingly enough, we've got some university customers. AstraZeneca is one of our big lighthouse accounts where they've got data scientists who may need a database deployed to do some analytics against. They don't want or need to care what the underlying networking looks like, right? What the storage DNA is. They just want an application service. For them, we came out with a shopping cart or a service catalog persona. It's really a full GUI overlay where they just get a very simple shopping cart experience, hit a button, maybe pick a t-shirt size, but that's it. So for us, it starts with who is requesting the service and how are they interfacing with all of those downstream components. So if self-service is the core, we titled this session, Hybrid Cloud Success. It really requires meeting the needs of a lot of different stakeholders. And I think one of the things I've noticed in talking with a lot of customers and our sales teams is more often than not, our channel partners, our sales teams, they act as therapists for the organization sometimes. You really see organizational dysfunction in all its glory when you start to ask, what are people wanting out of this hybrid cloud environment? And there are really 4 key domains that we see patterns emerge time after time after time. First and foremost is the core ops function. More and more, we see these being formed as platform engineering teams, which is nice. I think 5 years ago, we talked to senior infrastructure and automation leaders who knew they had a problem. They wanted that public cloud experience on-prem, but they didn't have the right skills. They didn't have the right team members. Now they are starting to get those automation engineers, those automation architects in the same team as their app dev guys to really own the charter around bringing that cloud experience on-prem while extending on-prem control to the public cloud. More and more, we see these platform teams also being the ones trying to operationalize Kubernetes. Oftentimes, we still see a fragmented approach to Kubernetes is inside big enterprise. Some teams using, Rancher, some using OpenShift, others up in the public cloud using EKS. That's more and more coming to bear. And then automating day 2 tasks, just operational workflows to do the grunt work that is still, day in, day out, a lot of what IT does. A second group that always comes to the party is security. More and more people are trying to do, true DevSecOps, embed security into everything they do. For them, Morpheus provides the abilities to carve their hypervisors and their public clouds into multiple tenants, map into their identity providers so that they can then apply very fine-grained policies to the groups and the roles within the organization. You want team A to only provision into these clouds, these types of items, at this price point, but make sure you have all of the security agents installed. You're using a confirmed image that meets the corporate standard. This is where security definitely comes to play. Third key area is the development team. We talked about that earlier. They are the ones really driving the adoption of public cloud, and they're also expecting that same level of service out of their private cloud. For the development community, we want them to be able to continue to use their open source tools, do the pipelines the way they're already doing them. We just want to let them focus on designing the new, not having to maintain the care and feeding of a brittle, script-based service portal. So we want to take care of all of the care and feeding of the CMDB, of the security agents, of the policies and the governance, so that they can focus on programmatically spinning up their environments and tearing them down as they roll through test and dev, QA, and ultimately rolling out into production. Lastly is the finance stakeholder. Somebody at the end of the day has to pay for it all. And when it comes to hybrid cloud, a lot of customers definitely did that early lift and shift and got the sticker shock to find out that cloud was not in fact cheaper. So for them, when Morpheus is installed, we connect to on-prem hypervisors, to public cloud accounts, inventory everything that's happening so that they can get some visibility to start with, but then start to right size those resources, reduce memory and CPO where things are over provisioned, but also standardize how they're pulling down public cloud pricing data. A true story, I was at a large retailer a couple years back. We had done a POC. When we first started it, we asked the head of I&O, how many VMs are in your environment between your public cloud and your on-prem VMware? He said it was about 10,000. We came back 5 days later, hated to tell him that he had 28,000 instances deployed, and he had an app dev team in the corner who was very fond of extra large instances in the public cloud that sat there doing literally nothing. So a lot of ways to kind of clean up the house as you advance the ball. I'll pause. That was a lot to dump on you. I think Jared, you've been down in the weeds with our stack for a long time. Anything that you'd add in that you think rings true when you're talking to customers?
Well, one of the things is, customers that I've worked with have, when you start talking about the developers and automate and orchestrate and building out the infrastructure as code and using their code, a lot of customers have built, and we'll talk about this in the trenches, but a lot of customers have their own scripts that they've written in the past. One thing I like about Morpheus is, you have a lot of technical debt that customers are bringing to the table that they've already put a lot of investment in, and they've already put a lot of work and thought process behind it. The one thing about Morpheus that I like is that its approach to leverage what you already have. Don't reinvent the wheel just to get automation or just to get application automation in place or get hybrid cloud management in place. Leverage what you already have, the native integrations that Morpheus has already for Ansible, Puppet, Chef, PowerShell, if you want to write Python, Groovy, all of those are natively built into the tool to where you can run those same scripts that you had before. So it really accelerates that time to market and really drives it much faster, I think, than what I've seen from other competitors in the space. It's
like we've done this before. You're reading my mind. In terms of reinventing the wheel or the wheel itself, that really is where we start. We don't have the luxury of usually walking into a nice, clean greenfield environment, some new startup company that has no technical debt. More often than not, we are talking to large enterprises that have a decade of tooling, of processes, of organizational dysfunction. What we've created really is a platform. It kind of frustrates me sometimes when I hear people call it a tool, because it is a platform framework where we have a number of abstractions within the platform, and we've used that to then create these integrations into the tooling that's already there, to Jared's point. When we walk in, when we install, we're a standard Linux packaging distribution, so we download and install in 15 minutes or so, oftentimes in our all-in-one. We want to get customers up and running very, very quickly, and that's where these integrations come in. When we say integration, we want to hold that to a pretty high bar for vSphere. It's what's your API endpoint? What are your service credentials? Fill in some metadata. We want to have you doing at least basic self-service within an hour or two of installation. Doesn't mean you're going to organizationally change your enterprise in an hour or two. I'm not that naive, but we really do want to make sure we're measuring value in hours and days, not weeks, months, or God forbid years. You have to start somewhere, and being able to start quickly and then iterate as you expand into different teams is what makes transformation happen, right? It's done a bite at a time, not in mass. I think kind of pivoting from this, and something that Jared mentioned was oftentimes we come in and you've got team A, using, let's say Ansible or Chef. Team B using, maybe using Puppet or VRO because they used to have VRA and they're trying to modernize. One of the things that I think customers appreciate and why they embrace Morpheus is because we have abstracted all of these different elements, they can continue to use the tools they have. They can swap those in and out without having to kind of reinvent the wheel. Oftentimes the homespun, handcrafted automation that some people try and do becomes very brittle over time. And if you change one element, breaks everything. Or if the wrong guy leaves your organization, so much for your automation workflows. Our goal is to create a platform that's much more sustainable, that will grow with companies as they evolve. And that's extended to which clouds they're using. So we talked about the amount of hybrid cloudiness out there. For us, we want to be that abstraction in front of your on-premises hypervisor stacks, your public cloud endpoints, but doing it in a way that doesn't require trade-offs. So more and more customers are definitely trying to consume cloud-native PaaS services as an example. So we want you to be able to mix and match some IaaS with a DynamoDB or an Elastic or another cloud-native PaaS service. AWS comes out with hundreds of those at any given time. We want to give you access to those using languages like CloudFormation, like ARM from Azure, so that you get the best of both worlds. So I'm going to pivot and toss it back over to Jared to maybe talk through a couple of actual examples, so some deals we've deployed jointly with Trace over the last couple of years.
So the large healthcare provider, this is a very interesting one, and God bless their soul, they're a great customer to work with. They had separate teams, and I say that, they're really great to work with. They have two separate teams, the Linux and Windows teams. One doesn't necessarily communicate with the other. The Windows teams, this is why I say this, the Windows team had built a tool through PowerShell and Visual Basic to provide a UI for them to go in and clone their applications out or their database servers out and apply new hard drives when the request came in. So they get a request through ServiceNow, they then take that and then go and look at it and say, okay, we'll plug in all this information and we'll then go run a script and go and pull that, which good on them. That was an amazing feat. I mean, I can't even begin to think of how many iterations they had to go through to get to that. But again, if someone leaves, then you're reinventing the wheel and trying to figure out how to reverse engineer that if they weren't the original owners of that. On the Linux side of things, they actually wrote a UI to where if somebody wanted to go, provision out a container's namespace or a Kubernetes namespace, they'd have a script that would go out there and actually provide that for them. Well, again, it's two disparate technologies. They had another container management tool that they were running with on the Linux team because that's what they knew. Internally, they made a joke that, hey, look, we buy one of every tool. Well, getting that implemented across the board is kind of cumbersome, and it's hard to manage, it's hard to maintain. And where Morpheus kind of came into play, when we first started talking to them, it was like, okay, let's talk to the Windows team, let's talk to the Linux team, and then let's talk to the DevOps team. And as we started talking to those teams more and more, it's like, how can we bring you into the fold? What do you guys use today as far as tooling goes? Are you Ansible? And they were a big Puppet shop. But they brought Puppet in, and they had a bunch of things they wanted to run with Puppet. So for Morpheus, it's a matter of an API. To Brad's point, it's a matter of give me the endpoint, give me a username and password or a key, and I'll log. Morpheus will log in, pull that information in, and then they were able to leverage that moving forward. Versus, rewriting a lot of their automation or rewriting their application stacks or rewriting how they do things. This kind of eliminated some of that that eliminated a lot of it for them. And then they started going back and reviewing what are the tools that are management interfaces that we don't use. How can we kind of slim down, our service offering and, provide more feature capabilities with Morpheus? How can we provide more feature-rich service offerings for our customer base and whatnot? So it definitely kind of helped change the way they think about things. From a compliance and security standpoint, obviously being a healthcare provider, there's highly regulated. Their security team actually comes to the table first rather than after the automation team. So they're the first ones that, will call you up and say, okay, this is how, these are the requirements you're required to meet. So that was an important part of that, build out of Morpheus was bring them in first and foremost, have them talking into the conversation, say what tooling or what type of things need to happen as we're provisioning these services out to your end users. What are requirements for you? So having that all integrated, they've done some amazing things with Morpheus now, and how they've integrated it and how they've used it and leveraged it. It's been quite impressive, over the long haul.
Yeah, they're a great reference. I've worked with them directly, and yeah, I think they went from, again, measuring their release cycles in weeks to now minutes, self-service. They're living the dream, and definitely expanded in some interesting areas, and continue to push the platform forward. So we do listen to our customers, and they're always giving us feedback, as our partners like Jared, to keep us moving.
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up. I mean, out of all the technologies that I've worked with, I would have to say Morpheus is probably one of the first that I would say, well, not one of the first, but one of the most responsive when it comes to customer needs. A customer had, you had mentioned VRO earlier, a customer had, and I cannot make this up, told me they have 3,500 workflows within VRO, and they're like, we can't just leave that behind. And I'm like, absolutely not. And Morpheus is like, you're right. Let's build an integration with VRO. And they came out with the integration for VRO because the customer was like, this is a huge part of our life cycle. And going back to the mantra that they're agnostic and they want you to leverage that technical depth that you have. It's kind of an interesting story on just seeing that evolve and accelerate their use cases. When it comes to the retail edge location, this is an interesting one. I have two customers that I'm working with. The one is a restaurant chain that has roughly about 500 to 700 restaurants nationwide. And one of the interesting things that they have is their IT team is about 6 people to manage all of those sites, maybe 10 on a good day. And so they've got to find ways to automate the deployment of their application stacks that are out on each one of these edge locations. But right now it's, you go to one site, you go and rebuild that one site, and then you go to the next site, you rebuild the next site. So really kind of the idea behind Morpheus is now when you're creating a blueprint, you create a blueprint to where it's, it's got all the configuration details you need. And if you need to go and reconfigure one of those applications, it's rather reconfigure, it goes and redeploys it. And all of the automated manual steps all the manual steps that you had before are now built into the application lifecycle and are built into that application management side of things. It's something that they're working on and working towards, to where it's providing them a much different approach of how they lifecycle their sites. How do they go and deploy new restaurants? How do they get new application stacks down there? And it's really kind of changed the way they look at things. From another edge location standpoint, I have an internet service provider that, if you think of like a CDN or your DVR, right? There's, transcoders that go into that. There's, I think it's a 30 some odd petabyte CDN that's basically sitting near their geolocations to where they're servicing from. And then they have other pop-ups outside of that then have more services, whether it be an encoder or something like that, to where you're getting different streams in. When you look at all that complexity that's involved in that and how they automate and how they go and build that out, Morpheus is really kind of that tool that can kind of tie some of those disparate technologies, whether it's, a team writing the transcoder side of things and writing the Ansible, or if they're going into, some of the management tasks that have to go into the public cloud, that work better in the public cloud or have been built for the public cloud side of things. Morpheus really kind of ties that together to where they're able to quit thinking about, this team is building this one technology for this one particular component. They're looking at it now as a full app stack to say, here's how we go to market with this. Here's how we go and distribute our new technologies or our application stacks out to the world. So it's really kind of a fascinating, approach. And again, the good thing with Morpheus, and I joke with my customers when I'm talking to them, is they ask, well, how do you do this? Well, the good and bad is that it depends, right? What do you want to use?
Every IT guy's answer to every question ever, right? Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, it depends. Like, well, how do you want yeah, how do you want to do it? What do you want to do? There's 10 ways to do it, and we just need to find out what's best for you. And fortunately enough for Morpheus, they're built to accommodate that, which is huge.
Yeah, the edge. It's been interesting to see that kind of as an emerging use case. And Gartner's classified it distributed cloud as the new hybrid. But yeah, the what used to be just private and public is now extending out to edge locations. And then you even mentioned Trace's interest in IoT. That's certainly risen the bar on what's possible and what's required in some interesting ways. I was talking with a customer in Europe who they literally want to put a server on every lamppost in Barcelona, and they're doing some edge, very unique edge distributions for some of their new applications.
And then the last use case we have, which again, I'm a big fan of. If we're going to use something, we're going to eat our own dog food, or if we're going to promote something, we eat our own dog food. And in this particular case, Trace3 internal labs, we put together client-facing, proof of concept labs. So if you wanted to have a chance to go in and utilize Morpheus, then it's an easy process for us to spin up, 10 different tenants to where you can go and then use Morpheus on real gear. If you wanted to test out Palo Alto, we've got a full lab where we can deploy that pretty quickly. And it's, all the components you need to test out the brand new release for Palo Alto, or if you want to test configs, those kind of things. So we offer those to our customers to get used to technology without going through the process, because time is valuable, and going through, everybody wants to play with new technologies, but the problem is the business is like, well, we have this small window that we need to do that in. Morpheus allows us to kind of accelerate that and say, hey, look, for these particular technologies, we can easily get that deployed. We can automate it for you, and we can help you get it, deployed much quicker. We also use it to simulate builds and validate a lot of code, because if we're writing Ansible scripts to go do installs for said technology, right? I'll use Morpheus for an install. Let's say we have an Ansible install for it. We actually have that built to the pipeline to where then it can go and validate the Ansible scripts are good. So that way, when we go on site, we're not sitting there, spending time figuring out, okay, this particular Ansible package has been updated or whatever. We've got that kind of figured out, prior to, and then, we also have this POC Labs internal uses for the internal teams. We have, and they'll hate me for it, but there's a lot of restrictions on what they're allowed to deploy, because, if you give an engineer, a terabyte of space, a terabyte of RAM, and, 40 cores, he's going to use every bit of that. I mean, they're going to use it. It's inevitable, but we have to put in ways like putting in naming conventions, because the last thing I want to do is, as we're demoing our labs, have somebody go in there and there's ASDF 123, ASDF 324. We don't need that either. We need consistency, and we need to manage some of that sprawl. We also have the conversation about costing metrics. So again, the finance guys are always asking me, like, how are we using the lab? How are we leveraging it? What are the costs associated with it? And luckily, Morpheus has built most of that into the product by default. So as soon as you get it up and running, you're already tracking those metrics as things are getting deployed. So it's been a game changer from that standpoint. It's been very easy to integrate and move forward with different integrations as we kind of, and we can build, pretty much anything we want into the application. It just depends on how we want to go about it.
Yeah, I think your engineers and our engineers went to the same school of naming things, because we have our own governance in our lab for sure. And I think what's awesome about this is I manage our technology alliances, and it's neat to see Trace use Morpheus to actually deploy other people's technologies as far as POCs, and even using Morpheus to deploy Morpheus. It's a little bit like Inception, but it's a great use case, and I love eating your own dog food. Perfect. Well, this, we're getting close to the end. I think hopefully this was a good view of this landscape at different altitudes from a customer data perspective, a little introduction to Morpheus, and then really where does the rubber meet the road with some stories from the trenches. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the things coming up and where people can get some more information.
Sure. So if you guys haven't, looked up the founder formula, it's a Trace3 podcast that we put on where it really kind of takes, the covers back and looks at disruptive technologies and trying to find different ways to accomplish things or tackle problems with the modern day complexities. So this is really kind of that insider's look of, how they created it, why did they create it, what was the need, what was the use case behind particular technologies, and really kind of get, the information direct from the source. And Brian Wheeler, you made the point earlier that I know Brian very well. I've got to know him very well over the last 4 years. Great person to meet if you're ever in Colorado. He's a great person to meet, great resource. Has done a great job with the product, and really happy to have him on here on our episode 31 coming up. So definitely as that comes out, check it out. Worth a listen for sure.
Yeah, that one should be interesting. I've worked with a number of CTOs and founders in different roles I've had over the years, and the fact that Brian's happy place is in a dark room with 4 monitors in a hoodie, writing code. I love it. He is he's definitely he is the brains and still the hands on keyboard behind a lot of what we do. So it should be a good podcast.
And then as far as next steps go, definitely reach out to us. Let's get meetings set up from even getting, if you want to go on a deeper dive on the infrastructure, reach out to myself or the Trace3 team or the Trace3 team or the Morpheus teams that you're working with. We can easily set up a POC either in your environments, or we can set up one in our own Trace3 labs where you can get access and kind of take kick the tires and see what's out there. And then obviously start with the Founders Formula podcast. And if you haven't looked into it, I highly recommend talking with your Trace3 team about VC briefings if you're really kind of looking at the industry to try to figure out what's next. They'd definitely be more than happy to kind of walk that through with your team and get you set up with that. I think those are 2 big takeaways that I'd highly recommend. And then the latest release of Morpheus, I'll let you go into that one.
Yeah, I know. Jared's chomping at the bit. Before we started this, he was asking me, so when is 5.3.1 coming out? So we do have one of these set up next week. We're going to talk a little bit about 5.3.1, which is probably the biggest release we've had so far this year, if not, in the last 12 months. We're doing some major updates on the Kubernetes front to help kind of build, manage, and consume Kubernetes. I've got some big improvements and updates on how we're approaching Terraform. Major overhaul of our GCP integration, and then even VDI, desktops as a service. That's a kind of a new domain, but really an adjacency when it comes to self-service, being able to spin up desktops and get access to those. So a whole lot of that and more coming up next week, and I'm still hoping we see that 5.3.1 GA kind of into next week or maybe into the next week, but it's right around the corner. So with that, I want to say thanks for everybody for jumping on. Thanks, Jared, for sharing the mic with me and bringing some insight and perspective on what you're seeing out there. If anyone has any questions, just follow up with us. But otherwise, have a great rest of your day.